All right, so we're back with section 11.1. This is going to be part 2. And we're going to take a look at the next step involved where we're working toward some equations that involve completing the square. So what we're going to do in this problem is the following. So let's just take a look at 46 and kind of see what we're trying to do. So we're given the problem x squared plus 8x plus blank is going to equal x plus blank squared. I want to come up with a number that goes here so that when I factor this, I come up with the same pair of factors. Let me kind of elaborate on this. You'll recall that in one of the examples that we did here from the first lesson, we had x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 100. In order to factor this to get x minus 3 times x minus 3, the only number I could possibly do that with is if this is positive 9. Any other number here, and I would not be able to factor this into two identical binomials. So what I want to do is to somehow come up with the exact number here that's going to let me write this as a product of two identical binomials. So how are we going to do that? Well, here we have the values of a, b, and c when we write a quadratic equation. In this one, the value of a and ax squared is going to be 1. For the value, the number next to the x term is going to be plus 8, so the value of b is plus 8. The value of c we don't know yet, but there's a little procedure we can exercise to help identify that value. And we can have it be anything we want, but what we're really looking for is what is going to enable us to put a number here that's going to make this true. So what the procedure comes down to is this. There are two steps. First, I'm going to take, so there are steps to this. First step is to take the value of b, and I'm going to divide that value of b by 2. The representation that I'm going to use for that is going to be b over 2. Once I take and find what that value is, I will take the value of b over 2, whatever it is, and I'm going to go ahead and square it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it equal to c. So at least for this activity. That's not going to be quite what we do when we complete the square, but it's going to be an integral part of the work we go toward. So in this particular activity, leading up to being able to complete the square, we go ahead, let's take the value of b, which is equal to 8. So let's see what that looks like now. So we know b is equal to 8. I'm going to take that and divide that by 2. That's going to go ahead and give me 4. I take 8, the value of b here, divide that by 2, that gives me 4. Here I'm going to take that value of 4. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to square that value of 4. That's going to equal 16. So for this particular activity, I'm going to go let c equal 16. And I'm going to put 16 here. So now that we have 16 in place there, let's see how I can factor that, and let's see if this works. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to 16 and add to 8. That's going to be, in this case, 4 and 4. And what I'm going to ask you to do in this first step, I'm going to ask you to star this because this 4 here is going to be the number that ends up here, and as a consequence, it's going to be the number that ends up here, because that's going to be a really critical step. It's one that students have a difficult time seeing, so don't be afraid to come back and look at this again. We'll do a few more examples of how we follow through on this, looking at these directions carefully. So, kind of isolate this. Let's take a look at a few more problems. Let's take a look now at question 48. So I have the problem t squared minus 6t plus something equals t minus some number squared. So to identify what this is going to be, well, I know b is equal, that's the number that's next to the, not the square term, but just the variable with no exponent. So b is going to equal negative 6. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take 6, negative 6, divide that by 2. That'll give me negative 3. That's the first step. Step 2 tells me I need to take negative 3. I need to square that. Now remember, when you square negative 3, this is going to be negative 3 times negative 3, and that's going to be positive 9. So the number we're looking for here is going to be 9. You recall also that I mentioned in step 1 that the number you find here is really the number you're looking for here. But you also are going to need this number too, so don't just stop here. So we're looking for this negative 3. Why? Because when I come up with my factors, this is going to be, let's see, what two numbers multiply to positive 9 but add to negative 6? Negative 3 and negative 3. So this is going to be t minus 3 times t minus 3, or t minus 3 squared. So again, this is what we're looking for. We'll come to understand this a little later when we see problems on completing the square. Let's take a look at some more problems this can get messy sometimes. Let's take a look now at 52. Going to move up the paper a little bit on this one. So 52, we'll have t squared minus 9t plus blank equals t minus some blank squared. Now, for some of you who are student math, you may notice right away that b is not a number. That means when we divide by 2, we're not going to necessarily have a really pretty result. So let's take a look at how we calculate this kind of a number through. Okay, so we're going to focus on a few more of these that contain fractions here that will result in fractions. Okay, so I have b equals negative 9. I take negative 9, I divide that by 2, and I'm just going to leave that as negative 9 over 2. I'm not going to mess around with trying to make it like a decimal or anything like that. I'm just going to leave it as 9 over 2. So when I come down here to take negative 9 over 2 and I square this number, that's going to give me a result of 81 over 4. So 81 over 4, that's going to be the number that goes here. But if you're trying to figure out, well, gee, how do I factor all this? Like, one number times itself is going to give you 81 over 4. You have the part of the first step. So this is going to factor up here into t, t, it's going to be minus 9 over 2 times minus 9 over 2. And this is going to be t minus 9 over 2 squared, because they get the same thing down here. So you don't have to worry about factoring these as long as you can recognize in the first step of getting this number that you're going to put here, that you can simply put that number there to represent this as t minus 9 over 2 to the second exponent. Let's take a look at another problem that contains a fraction to see how we handle that. Looking above, making sure you can see what I'm writing on the top there so it's not cut off. And let's go ahead and take a look at 54. So this is going to be x squared plus 2 over 3x plus blank is equal to the quantity of x plus something squared. Okay, so what we do in this problem now, let's go ahead and find the value of b and identify that. That's going to be positive 2 over 3. Well, if we want to multiply this or divide this by 2, we can either divide it by 2, or we can take 2 over 3 and multiply it by 1/2. So this is an important distinction of the problem. Dividing by the 2 is essentially the same as multiplying by 1/2. Okay, because, and here's the rationale for this. For those of you that want to see it, and I know that some of you are going to want to see it, if I take 2 over 3 and I divide by 2 over 1, I just divide by 2, I'm going to put a 1 under that. So another way I can rewrite this is 2 over 3 divided by 2 over 1. Well, if I want to do the division with a fraction here, I need to flip this and make this multiplication, so it's going to be 2 over 3 times 1 over 2. Just multiply by 1 over 2, I'll be perfectly fine with that. You don't have to show me all this work. This is pre-algebra kind of work, pre-algebra even. So you don't have to show me all this. If you multiply by 1/2, I'm perfectly fine with it. So you'll notice here that if we have 2 times 1 over 3 times 2, the 2's will reduce, giving me 1/3. Again, we're going to star that because that's going to be an important number later. Then in the second step, if I take 1/3 and I square it, that's going to be 1/3 times 1/3, or 1/9. So 1/9 is the number that's going to go here. Well, what number times itself is going to give me 1/9 and the sum of 2/3? It's going to be 1/3. So when I factor this, this is going to give me x plus 1/3, x plus 1/3. Because I have the same thing here, I can write this as x plus 1/3 to the second. Now I know not all my students are really strong in fractions, so as a consequence of this, please make sure that you stop and see me in class if you have any questions about how to do this kind of work. That includes the second installment of this lesson. We will have a third lesson on completing the square and coming up in the third video.